Cool. Right. Open truth about intent data. So hopefully I won't have to explain too much about the matrix to a lot of you, but yeah, it's gone quite heavy on theme. Um, but so yeah, let me just come into running out of time, so I'm going to get straight into it. So the main point of the session today is, technology, like so many today, are built to help us get closer to our customers. So this is a little excerpt from a great speech from Dr. Chapman, who's filmed The Great Dictator, which is, the main point is, for technologies and like intent data and so many other tools out there today, we are, they are made to help us get closer to our customers and not just to sell product. So the next question to answer is like, why am I here? And who the hell am I to be able to talk about intent data? So for the last I've been in sales for most of my life. For the last 10 years, been in B2B marketing. And the main point in that is that I love technology, and I've been able to work that into my job, my role, where I get to speak to our customers and I get to research this technology for a lot of our customers and actually help to advise them on the different platforms. My interest is to understand, what do things do, and what else can we make it do, and not just about what it says on the tin. But first and foremost, I am not a marketing technologist. There are a lot more smarter people out there that make things work. So the main point of this session today that I want to bring across to you guys is that these are the three things I would like to get across. What is intent data and what it isn't? How can you get the most out of your investment, and how to choose the right vendor for your business. So this is quite interesting. So we're sort of going back to the grassroots a little bit in terms of what is intent. So if we look at the first one from Cambridge Dictionary and talk about what intent is giving something all of your intention or all your attention to something. And I think if a lot of intent data providers would have to actually.
We seem to have got a slight technical hitch. Matt disappeared, I think, for all of us, and hopefully Richard's just sent a message to say, please rejoin Matt. So I'm hoping that we'll have Matt back on screen very shortly. He has to click participate to join. So not quite sure why that fell over. We all know that we've all got issues sometimes with home connections or whatever. It might be that. So we have lost the video. I'm hoping people can hear me. So I'm just waiting for Matt to come back on. Lindsay's making me laugh. It's a glitch in the matrix. Yes, we all do feel that as we are in a parallel world at the moment, and it's nice to know that some people out there can hear me. And thank you. That's great, Sarah and Steve. Nice lamps. Yes, I have had lots of comments about my my background. I would have quite liked more of a branded one. So I'm hoping that Matt is going to be jumping back on any minute now. I hope he might be presenting to a whole other world out there, and we've just got to that definition of what is intent data, and I was on the edge of my seat waiting to hear. So is that the same route that Joe Wicks? No, I don't think so. I think if I started jumping up and down here, that my ornaments would definitely fall off. Matt, you're back. Fantastic.
This is bound to happen, wasn't it? Just as I get into the flow, something was going to go wrong.
And you were in your flow, so come on, back to intent. And don't worry about taking a bit more time, because we're going to go into the lunch, and I know everybody's really keen to hear about this. So just ahead, Matt.
You know what? And I was just I was talking quite nicely to myself, and I got the message going, Matt, you're basically talking to yourself, dude, which is fine. So so before anybody drops off, which slide did I last leave you on? I love that, Lindsay. I love your comments about there's a glitch in the matrix. Love it. So where are we in terms of which slide? You're on the definition. Okay, cool. That's great. So I shall go back to that. So so I can't see the chat function once I go into presenter mode. So thanks for everyone who WhatsApped me. That was really kind. So definition. So which was back to definition of intent data. So yeah, there we go. Great. All right. So back into presenter mode. So my definition, again, so I'm not entirely sure if I got there. For the purpose of the session is that it is a platform or the purchase of raw data from a vendor that gives you insight into what content is being consumed by your accounts. that match a predefined criteria by name and firmographics, and that information can then be scored by recency and velocity of their content. But why is intent data awesome? Well, it can show you companies that you are targeting that have a high likelihood of the propensity to buy your product, and that is matched by firmographics, named accounts, and the keywords that you are using to associate with your products. They can also show you what types of content they're consuming, where they're consuming it. It can also then start to score people and even move them all the way down to the point of actual location. So scoring them by levels of intent. So how much are they trending? How many people are they within that company are searching for content? And then also looking at unknown trending companies. And this is pretty cool because even if you haven't dropped in those named accounts or and you've got the intent search, what a lot of these platforms will do is they'll use some cool AI tricks and they'll start to surface up companies who you're not targeting or tracking, who are showing high levels of engagement with certain types of content, which you can then sort of look to pivot to and be quite agile in your marketing approach. And then something that maybe not a lot of people are thinking about when it comes to intent data, but it can support a lot of your other marketing activities, such as your PPC, your communication planning more broadly, your SEO strategies. So it's about looking at where else can we actually start to sort of plug in the benefits of this insight that the data actually is giving you. There's one negative, and it's not really a negative, but the main point here is that it is not to be confused with predictive intent or predictive analytics. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is actually intent data monitoring. So what's happening in the market now. Predictive intent or predictive analytics is actually using your first party data, so your CRM stuff, past purchasing behaviors and invoicing schedules, and then layering that on with second party data to then build out a picture of what somebody might do based on historic activity. The data monitoring that we're looking at today is actually looking at the activities that are happening now, in the last week, and against your current set of keywords and terms. So I hope that's come across. And that's all great and well, but what is the purpose of it all? And so the promise of intent data really is that if we look at a linear customer journey, because you all know customer journeys are linear, and generally as somebody makes, they go through customer need and research. This part of it is largely unknown. And the promise of intent data is that it will actually enable you to engage with people much earlier on their journey, because it will help you understand who's in market, or rather which companies are in market, not people. I think a lot of intent data will make it very clear that because of certain reasons they can't tell you who or aren't able to track whom, which platforms or which companies are actually in market and which stage of the journey they're at. So again, coming back to the point of what it will show you, it is who is researching by company. You can infer the types of people who it is, but no platform will actually be able to tell you the actual person. What are they researching, and at what stage of the buying journey they're at? And then lastly, who you are not targeting that is in market. Now the really interesting part is how they actually do it. So without my notes, I think it was in here somewhere. So the way it's able to do that is they'll use a variety of signals. So it'll be content and people have done it to publish a website. They'll use tracking IDs. Some will use cookies. Some will just use IP lookup. And so they've got all these different ways to actually bring it all together into one cohesive sort of data hub. But the reality is, customers do not travel in a linear journey, and how do you then put this all into context? Because if you've got all this information, I think we can all agree that unless you've got the tools or a robust framework to actually engage with people leveraging that information, how are you actually going to do it? In order to do that, we need a new lens. How do we actually look at that customer journey? And this is something that we've built over time on a way to look at people in a slightly different way to ensure that when we do engage with them, we engage with context, relevance, and above all else, timing. And that, and intent data is great for those types of things, because it's telling you what's happening now. It's telling you what they're looking at now, and it's giving you the opportunity to be relevant to those people. But so if we look at this type of framework where the customer can, let's say, transcend the barriers of the normal linear customer journey and be a multiple touch points and have this wonderful paradigm of being interested and not being interested in and then coming back to you at a different moment. If we just look at the things that we can not control, and those are things like culture, that are things happening to them, there are industries. So these are properties that you are outside of your control. And then there's things on the inside of the circle, which are things that are inside of your control. So that's your brand, the solutions that you offer, and the products that you have to sell to people. And staying on this for a minute, and especially, you can read through this the description on the side. I'm not going to go through all of them for time's sake, but the main focus here is actually on the outer two rings. The great thing about intent data is that it's not just looking at about your it's not just looking at the types of content people are consuming, but it's also looking at those cultural and industry contexts. And leveraging those, we can actually start to join the conversation with our customers rather than to try and start a new one with them. Now, how do we sort of create that brand salience when they aren't actually in the market for a product right now, but they may be facing a challenge within their industry or within, culturally, how they're looking to overcome certain barriers, whether it be technology or marketing or whether it be, some other form of challenge that they need to overcome as marketers or even technologists. And that's where we try to focus a lot of our thinking when it comes to leveraging intent data. How can we join that conversation much earlier on their buyer journey and create that brand salience with them? So my ugly truth number one is intent data will not fix your pipeline problem. Intent data has been known to increase lead of sales conversions. It has been known to increase engagement with key target accounts, and it has been known to contribute millions of pipeline. It has even been known to be able to reduce your sales cycle by some undefined number, depending on who you speak to. I could debate that question with you for a while, but I think that's for a different session. But if you haven't got the framework and infrastructure behind it to actually engage the people with the context and relevance, it's actually not going to solve that problem. So first and foremost, before we go any further, or even you go ahead and go, this is all great, Matt. I've got all those things, and I want to go and buy intent data. You've got to stop and ask yourself a couple of extra things, because now this comes down to the nitty-gritty of how you actually set up and use intent data. Have you invested in your SEO keyword strategy? Have you clearly mapped out your target accounts and tiered them? And I think it's one thing just to take a list from the salespeople, but have you ratified that and actually invested time in clearing those and make sure you've got all the data you need? Are our client personas robust and cover all the stakeholders, not just talking about the one or two or three? I think a lot of people, I'm just checking, I've got another message, just to make sure I'm still live. No, it's fine. They cover all the stakeholders, because face it, in a B2B sales journey, you've got more than 3, 5, 7, sometimes 10. I think we got quoted that from one of our classes a while ago, there's over 25 different people in this decision-making process. And do you have enough content at each stage of the buying journey? Now, content is like a wonderful thing. It keeps coming back to marketers all the time. Like, should you have more is less, or more or less is better, and work in emotion. I mean, the reality is that with intent data, you could well be facing down the barrel of having to create more content, because yes, you'll have your content calendar already set out, but if you're going to be agile and moving with those cultural and industry changes that you're unearthing through intent data, which you may not plan for, you're going to have to create more content and quickly. So have you actually got that budget to play with? And if not, have you got enough each layer of your customer journey, in terms of when you start to think about your intent mapping against keywords and stuff? Have you got content to support those programs? And then the last question, I suppose, is your relationship with the sales team strong enough that you can actually rely on him to follow up on the campaigns or work with you on those campaigns? And often it requires that you have a pilot, a 5% project where you pick on one champion within that team, and you have to start there, and a lot of it's about those bringing them into the fold. So coming back to, we're thinking about, the customer journey and how and the different ways we can start to apply intent data. There are, there really are, 4 key parts of the journey where you think about, before they buy. So it's like net new acquisition of people and helping them to influence them along that journey with different tools and bits of content, and you bring them around to when they actually buy, which is great. And the one thing a lot of people then go is like, oh, great, that job's done. Intent data or any other nurturing goes out the window. You think, well, actually, no, you can actually also use it for after they've bought. So, and after, so once they've gone through that journey, after bought, you can actually think about, well, when they're in our ecosystem, they've bought our product, you can continue to leverage intent data to understand what they're doing. Do they have any additional problems? Do they, or challenges? Do they, perhaps need to have, other services or products that you're working that they haven't actually bought yet or aware of? Are they searching for those things? And then probably most importantly when it comes back to renewal time. Are they looking elsewhere? Do they have different challenges? What are the other things they're searching for on the World Wide Web? I was going to say internet, but I think it's probably well overused. Have respect to those, not just for net new acquisition, but it's also for post-acquisition, to understand our customers better and have growing them through those upsell opportunities and actually get close to them. Again, it's not just about selling, it's about how we can be more helpful to our customers. So, coming back onto the next ugly truth, it's like, don't take the leap of faith. There is one thing that we should always think about, is like having solid use cases for intent data. And this is what a lot of people that I've spoken to, they'll have one, or they'll get asked a question. I've been asked to explore this, or somebody told me about Y, or I found out about this platform. I need it, or I've got this intent platform. It doesn't work. And you've got to ask yourself on some level, is it the platform, or have you just not really invested enough time to truly understand it and what its capabilities are? And dare I say, almost 6 times out of 10, you can find that actually somebody left, or it was a project for a single use case, and because that person left or priorities changed, it just fell off a cliff, and then everybody forgot about it and just became a really expensive tool that you have that nobody really knows what it does. So the obvious use cases that you can have for intent data is demand generation, ABM, communications planning, and my personal favorite, customer engagement. So it's post acquisition or sale engagement with your customers. Understand what they're doing, get closer. How can we create loyalty and inspire advocacy? And I think those two. So coming up to my next ugly truth is, if you've only got one use case, rather, let's rephrase, if you've only got one, you may find yourself struggling at some point. I always advise people, how many other use cases can we build out within the organization? Because your current use case is probably not good enough, to sustain the growth, use, and the implementation, and get that ROI that you're ultimately seeking from the leveraging this platform. Going straight into ugly truth number 3, which is, just because you can buy it does not mean that you have the infrastructure to actually use it. Now, what the hell does that mean? So, well, when people buy a new piece of technology, have you actually got the internal experts who can help you onboard it and set it up? What about, how do you then build it so that you have a team of people who are actively using it? I think this is probably one of the hardest things when it comes to technology and, any form of sort of like cultural or business change, which is, you've got to think about all the people inside who are actually using the thing. They've got to want to get on board with it. And so, and also thinking about, all the different types of use cases when you want to have more than one person or team that might be leveraging the platform to get ROI. You've got to think about building cross-departmental teams. I'm talking about customer success teams. I'm talking about the sales teams, and not just the marketing team, who, I think for all the obvious reasons, have got a very good idea of how they want to leverage their data once they get into the middle of it. Then you have an operations person who's actually going to invest in pulling up the dashboards and updating it. So build cross-mental teams, identify additional stakeholders and bring them in early in the negotiation process. So when you start building up your use case, so going back to truth 1, you've got to think about, okay, what are the other use cases, and what are your needs? Let's have a little confab about it. Let's build out that sort of list of requirements. build out a mutual SLA. So when you actually do buy it and everybody's invested in it, everybody's on board actually using it. Get some of their budget. If it's not only a marketing initiative, use the sales team's budget, use some of the customer success teams because it's a team effort. I tell you what, everybody will very quickly, it becomes very real, and they start to actually allocating people for those pilot projects and they get their investment out of the usage of the platform. And the second one is set some targets. And not just about pipeline, it's about usage. How many of those key target accounts are coming back to our website? Have our PPC campaigns been improved off the back of feeding in this intent data? Many intent data platforms will actually have live interaction or live integrations with different sort of media platforms and social media platforms that helps you update your campaigns. Have we looked to, by pivoting to different types of content that we've seen people searching against, have we actually seen an increase in leads generated or again or engagement with key target accounts? And also, how many net new accounts that we weren't targeting have been served to the sales team, and what is the return on that? Have they actually been having better conversations, especially as demand gen teams which are picking up the phone? And then lastly, test, learn, and iterate. It will not be right from day one. You can get pretty close if you've put a lot of those. When I said stop and ask yourself these questions, you can get pretty close if you've done a lot of those things. Chances are you haven't done all of them. But through this process, it can actually support a lot of these initiatives. So the SEO stuff, test and learn approach, we SEO keyword strategies, and a lot of the intent data can actually help you inform some of those too, especially when you're doing those live updates and iterating. So ugly truth 4: not all vendors are created equal, and this is a harsh reality. Just because you like a vendor, you like the salesperson, you've used them before, you enjoy the UX, it does not mean that they're actually fit for purpose for your new business or your new use case. And so whenever I speak to our customers about, which platform is right, everybody has an opinion, everybody's heard about one or other, but how do you cut through that noise? And I also go, well, let's boil it down to, one set of core principles which we've already established because we've built out our cross-departmental teams and we've built out those use cases, which is these are the core set requirements and the outcomes that we want to generate. And so when I start looking at things like this, I bake these into a little table and I put a higher importance in some of these services. But in order to get to that endpoint, I start off with something that looks a bit like this. These are the key pillars that you'll find all intent data platforms will have to some larger or lesser degree. They will all have firmographic or contact data, contact data to a lesser degree. But they will all have that free account data, which pretty much anybody can get, if you've got the time and effort into getting it. Then they all do that content consumption. So that's that data monitoring, which is happening across all the different publisher websites. And then some will also include that paid account data, so the one at the bottom. And this is a pivotal question that you need to ask a lot of people, because they won't actually tell you that you need to buy those additional sources, but they will say it's included in the service. And that actually happened to me recently. So I think, again, it's just having experience in, asking the right questions. Anyway, getting back to the point of this graph, which is, if there ever was a place to be happy, it's slap bang in the middle. I can get all things to all people, but the reality is it doesn't really exist unless you have additional technology that helps you orchestrate all of this stuff, which is out there. But from a single intent data platform provider, it doesn't. It's not there. But so when you go to these different providers, you find each of them have their own different types of niches. A lot of them will offer predictive analytics or using first product data to supplement the intent that they have. Some will just use cookie-based, some will use IP lookup, some will use both, some will use ID tracking for certain devices. Some will then also go as far as to do stakeholder mapping, which is great for ABM programs, and a lot of them won't actually go that far. Some of them will offer you telesales and research and off the back of that intent scores, and some of them will go like, well, great, we could do some research and content creation off the back of these things so you can be more agile with your content. And I'd say, that's quite a lot of noise when you start talking to people. And my advice to you would be to go back to the fundamental basics of, what is it you're asking, because it's so easy to be sucked into the opportunities of what if, But rather than actually getting under the hood of what that platform actually does and how good, or if it's relevant enough to you. So I mean, the real questions that you need to be thinking about when you're asking vendors. So here's some of them, it's not all of them. Is, where does your data actually come from, and do you collect it yourself? Do you get it from another platform? Because you'll find a lot of them do, and as a result of that, I've actually found that with some, you can actually buy, a lot of vendors buy access to intent data from other vendors, but you actually get a lesser service unless you actually buy direct from the one that they bought it from. And again, things change all the time, but that's a lot of what I've seen out there today. And what those vendors who are buying intent data are actually doing is they're trying to sell you, and they call services that actually the other products that they have in their locker. Another question is, do I need to buy any other licenses to make it work? So it's going back to that paid account data stuff, right? So we're thinking, if you're building out the platform, they're like, great, we'll do intent, and then you also pull in data from LinkedIn, and we pull in data from a company's house, and think, okay, well, let's bolt it in. They're like, no, it's not. Actually, you need to have a Salesforce Navigator license, for example, as well. So that's actually on top of your license. And so again, it's just being really clear about make sure you ask those types of questions right at the top. And then there's other questions like, well, if this is a fantastic question that I like to ask vendors, like, if there's one thing that you do better than anybody else, what is it? Because they all go like, we've got great intent data, yes, but what is it? Is it location? Is it which part of the world are you best at? Is it is your firmographic data? And if it is, what makes it so good? Is it your contact data, or is it the quality intent? And again, that's something really hard to quantify. And I think you'll find that when you do start looking at different vendors, what you do need to start thinking about is actually speaking to people who've used different platforms, or maybe like dare I say, speak to a third-party vendor who's used a lot of different types of these platforms, has a good idea that especially on geos, right? I mean, it's few and far between. A lot of people say they cover globally or they cover these markets, but the reality is you probably need to do a head-to-head test to actually see which platforms give you the best results or best types of intent in those different geos. Just keeping an eye on little buzzers to make sure that I have not dropped off yet. So I'm coming to the end of my presentation, and also that follow the white rabbit. Have fun with it, enjoy the ride. There's some amazing things that you can actually get from intent data, and it can add tremendous value to your customers in terms of and your brand by creating that salience right up front when you think about the culture and context, creating satellites around them of being helpful and engaging with them before they're even aware of your product. And just being there when they need you most. But to get to the main highlights of the presentation, and hopefully I've covered off those three things that I want you to learn. If not, I'm sure the chat will go mad. You should always be looking to use intent data to add value at every stage of the customer journey. It's not just acquisition; it's post-acquisition of customers to get closer to them. Attempt to do your best to have multiple business cases rather than one particular use case like PPC. Assess vendors objectively, build cross-functional teams, and make sure you have the budget to run the campaign as not just the platform, the cost of the platform, which is something that a lot of people forget. And then test, learn, repeat. Now I think I can hear Shane's just come on.
Yes, I have. So thank you very much, Matt. Brilliant. So many practical tips there, and fan of great deep research. If you just take your summary screen away, and then we'll have you back on full screen, which is great. One of the things I wanted to ask you was very much around the sort of the suppliers and the vendors, and I love the fact that you ask about, you must know the how and the where they collect their data. Do you think the vendors have made this worse by making it murky, being honest? They don't really like to tell you.
Yes, they have. And I think it's one of those weird things. I think people get hung up about it, right? About that honesty piece, and I think you should, or not being honest is the short answer, and that's why I think it's really refreshing to talk to vendors who would just tell you. Of course, they've got to keep some secrets on how they actually get the intent and how they the mechanics and background in terms of how they, for example, location. So. I had a really interesting conversation with one of the guys going, well, how can you actually define the location based on their intent data? I mean, what have you got that other people don't have, and how you actually know? So I can't actually tell you, but I can give you a rough idea. And if you know a bit more technical aspects of cookie tracking and stuff, it's actually a really hard thing. So it's a pinch of salt, but also get some insight.
I think that's such a key point. I mean, I found that personally, you made the point about really understanding where the strengths of intent data are. Forget it. If you want to do anything in Africa, there just isn't the amount of intent data there. You're really well served in the USA, fantastic coverage. Europe is a bit spotty. And picking that point up about geolocation, I think really important. It came up yesterday. One of the issues we have obviously with geolocation and IP tracking is how good is it? Is it an IP of a company's head office, but is that person based there? Certainly not at the moment. Again, we've got these issues now with people working from home. One of the questions from Lindsay is, have we seen a decline of the power, if you like, of intent? Because actually so many of us are using floating IPs. We're just not going to pick it up if that's all you rely on. And this is where you come to your point about the other providers and some of their other data sources. Where would you say the data sources in intent would have an advantage which aren't just relying on IP at the moment?
So this is a great point, because I think it comes back to having multiple use cases for intent. Because the reality is, yes, IP is going to struggle, and the reality is it actually always struggled a little bit, because if you think about, most people are actually surfing the browser or reading things on their mobile devices. If they're using a mobile network, they can't actually track you, right? Fact.
Unless
Right. So
you download something. For the publishers, they're the ones who are cleaning up at the moment, aren't they? Because they have actual data.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is great, right? But that comes back into the multiple use cases. So if you're thinking, well, you can still get intent on what people are searching for. You may not get where their location is, for example, but you can still go, well, actually, there's still high investment and trend in X topic or Y, and I can still pivot my PPC to or my content strategies to address those issues and challenges. And yes, I think it is going to become difficult, but it's only going to get harder. You've got the CCPA, you've got GDPR, all of these things starting to take sort of more momentum as time goes on. But a lot of these vendors are already starting to come up with this problem. Even Google's got its own solution to privacy and cookies at the moment. And so I've actually been talking to a lot of them quite a lot about, well, how are you going to overcome this? I mean, because it's not all just device IDs and reverse IP lookup. It's the cookies. I think there's a lot of hype around it. I think the reality is technology has always found a way to supply us with that information, despite whatever regulations are going on. And we must never forget, it's not about being a big brother. It's about we're still seeking out that context and relevance and timeliness of a thing. Do we really need to know where they are, as long as you know what they're talking about and what their problems are?
And I think that point you made about assessing all of the vendors in the landscape, and that very helpful grid for your use case is so important, because some will be better than others for some use cases. So trying to say this is the best for everybody just won't work in my experience. And I love, my favorite application, like you, of intent data is absolutely around renewals and post journey, because it tells you the bit you don't know about your customers, because you have their intent and their behavior with you, but you don't know what they're doing with your competitors. So you might think, oh, fab, they're doing lots with us, but actually that could mean that they're researching lots of the competitors too. And I completely agree. I think it's one of the strongest use cases for enterprise businesses, using intent to better, deeper understand what their customers are doing outside their narrow view. So that was a great tip.
Which is another reason why ABM has latched onto intent data so much, right? Because they're not only looking for the new sale, they're looking for like how they can understand those accounts even more, right? How can I get even closer to them to understand their needs and requirements? But that's not to say other people can't start to do that as well. Because the reality is there will be other things they just don't know about you. They will, quite often your clients will assume you do that one thing, and they'll see all your marketing collateral. That's great, but you'll always be that one provider. But can you start a conversation in a slightly different way?
Well, but Lisa Schutter wants to put you on the spot and says, I do understand one size doesn't fit all, but if I can put you on the spot and you were to provide headlines on each of the vendors, which vector would you put them in? Are you prepared to, go public?
Actually, no. I would say that if you want to do that, we can have a one-to-one conversation about your challenge, and we can find the right vendor for you.
Okay, that's fair enough. I think that's fair enough. I think for me, it's that deep research of understanding how and where they collect that data,
Yeah,
and what's right for you. And I think certainly within ABM, I would put the people who are building out the deep stakeholder, probably using the phone as well as
yeah,
purely digital signal. And then, in the opposite quadrant, so you've got people down there like I'll name names, Martech Tracker. Then in the top right quadrant, you've got science, who are obviously doing, the predictive analytics, building
yeah,
out the models, taking in signals, lots of people. And then you've got the bulk data providers, the publishers. You've got people like Bombora who are bringing it in. I referred to murky. I would just say that some of the publishers and some of the aggregators need to be more honest about their data sources, because actually you can find you might be paying for the same feed from a number of sources. And that's where working with companies like the Crocodile really helps. You're doing it for lots of clients. And
yeah,
I would say for lots of people trying to do this for themselves, it's hard,
yeah.
so it's great you've got that expertise. I think your practical tips were superb. Thank you, Matt, for
No,
a
my
great
pleasure.
presentation. And I know you're going to happy to take one-to-one questions. So really super. Thank you very much indeed.
Awesome. Thanks, Shane. Thanks for the opportunity. Speak
Okay,
soon.
I hope people connect with Matt individually. Do go over to the networking, try the Roulette Expo. I can't offer you any nice lunch, I'm afraid. This is my biggest bugbear about virtual conference. There is nothing, apart from what's in my fridge. So I shall see you all later on. And thanks again, Matt. Super session.
See you later. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.